wish to see all my grandkids and kids, everybody, enter into the pearly gates.
Yeah.
That's my only wish. You all are doing well so far. But to reach that final home with the Lord is my desire. That's my wish, which I will blow the candle out to.
All right.
One,
1, 72, we are 71.
no.
1, 2, 3. YouTube family, so welcome once again to another video. As you can see from the title of this video, today I will be talking about grief. I'll be talking about grief for a little bit. Grief is something that none of us ever want to experience, but it is something that we just can't avoid it, because life is what it is and people are born and people die. That is the cycle of life. You understand? Can't really explain a lot of things. Sometimes we don't have the answers, but we just understand that this is just a part of life. Death is a part of life, you know. But today I want to talk a little bit about my experience with grief. Let's go back a little bit to 2020, 2020, when the world was on lockdown. We know what happened in 2020, and the stresses of that. And in 2020, my grandmother was ill. And the illness was slowly progressing, but progressing nonetheless. And it was just tough seeing it unfold. And remember, I am a nurse, so this wasn't my first experience with illness. It was my first experience seeing someone deteriorate over time, but it was my first time seeing someone who is a loved one pass away like that. I've had people pass away, church people, family, but distant family and that kind of thing. But when it is someone who is really close to you, where you're involved in their day-to-day life, it is a whole different experience. And I was there full time, right around the clock. Like, I would have, I had the privilege of bringing her to, different treatments if she needed to go into Kingston, all of that. I had the privilege of doing that for her. And, in retrospect, I am grateful. I am grateful that I was able to do that. I am grateful that I was able to help her in her lowest moments, in her weakest moments. I'm grateful that she never had to be alone while experiencing these things. As I said earlier, it's not an easy thing to talk about, but I believe I'm at a place of acceptance. I'm at a place where I see it for what it is, and I am just grateful right now that she's no longer in pain. She's no longer in discomfort, But believe me, as I said, this was my first time having someone close to me pass away. So, even, just seeing her deteriorate, and can't forget one day, she was there in the room, and I was there sitting on the floor, and at first I was playing some music, because she used to love to sing. She loved our gospel music and so on, and always have her radio on. And I remember that day I turned on some music, and she never wanted the music on, She never wanted the music on. And when somebody like that love music, no one hear no music, said the person just out of it, She was out of it. And so I asked her if she wanted me to read the Bible for her. She said yes, and I was reading, I believe, Psalm 103, if I'm not mistaken, and it was talking about, how man is like green grass, or I believe, I don't want to misquote it, but it was talking about how life comes and goes, and how we wither away, pretty much, And remember me, I read through the scripture and break down, man. I couldn't hold it. She never saw that I was crying, but I couldn't hold it. Like, me break down. you know. And it was a very hard experience because, you know, when you're a nurse, you have a clinical understanding and I have a clinical way of seeing things. So I'm seeing things through the lens, not just of a family member, of a grandson, but I'm seeing through the lens of a nurse. You understand? And I knew that her time was coming. I know, like I saw her slipping away. I've had patients over and over who you see it day by day, and you know, no matter what kind of treatment, no matter this, that, unless it's a miracle, you know that the time is coming. And I saw that, and I saw it, and I had to grapple with that. You know, I had to grapple with that, and it never easy. It never easy. Seeing somebody, watching somebody that you love and you know pass away is one of the hardest things in life. You know? And I remember the night that she passed away, when we brought her back to the hospital. This is one of the things that, up to today, this is one of the memories or the thoughts that stand out in my mind and sometimes brings tears to my eyes, you know. It's when I remember that, you know, she was at home and she was just very uncomfortable. So we brought her back to the hospital. And, you know, I brought her into the emergency room and, you know, the doctors were doing all that they were doing. But as I said, as a nurse, I knew that from when I bring her to the hospital, I knew that she wasn't coming home. I knew that she wasn't coming home. I just knew, you know, and I was there at the side of the stretcher. She was on a stretcher and I'm there talking to her, and I think I said to her, like I said, Mr. Grandma, you know, say, I said to her that, I said, Grandma, you know, say, we don't really come here for stay though, you know? We don't really come here, we're not really here on the earth to stay, you know? You know? And she said, I know, but, and she asked me she said, but why it take so long, you know? Just that season of suffering, that time of suffering. She said, you know, why it take so long? You know, because I believe she was just ready to go now by that point. And, you know, even that night when I was supposed to leave her there, and I was walking away, and, you know, as I said, I knew that she wasn't coming out. I knew that she never did come out of the hospital alive, you know? And me never, in that time, I try wrap my mind around what should I say? What should be my last words to her, you know? But at the same time, I never wanted to speak to her in a way where she knows that I know that she's gonna pass. I still want to keep hope alive. So, you know, when I was leaving, I said, Grandma, we'll see you tomorrow, you know. And she said, all right, tomorrow, and, you know, remember the bath pan, because she tell me about the bath pan and something else I'm supposed to carry. She said, remember if you carry the bath pan when you come. You know? And I walked away and went home and thing, and because my wife was visiting Jamaica at that time, and I said, babe, Grandma don't look so good, you know. And I remember I went to sleep. It was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I went to sleep, and maybe about 4 o'clock, thereabout, the phone started ring. So from the phone started ring, I know exactly what is happening. 4 a.m. in the morning, you're getting a call from an unknown number. Doctor is calling to say X, Y, and Z, and, you know. Yeah, got the news that Grandma passed away, and it did rough, man. It was rough. Rough. When I say rough, it was rough. You know? And I think one of the things as well that was tough for me is that I had some information that not everybody had, like family members. You know? Because I'm a nurse, there's just certain information I did have what everybody never have, and, you know, out of privacy, you know, from my grandmother and so on, I just keep certain things to my chest. But, you know, carrying the weight of that was rough. Knowing exactly what is happening and just have to hold it was rough. When I say rough, even some things that I knew and I saw that I couldn't even tell my grandmother, because when somebody is at that vulnerable place now, you don't want to tell them more things to weigh them down. You want to try to keep, that hope alive and that spirit up, her spirit up as much as possible, So, yeah, it was a very tough experience. It was a tough, when I say rough experience, but, God brought me through it and thank God for a supportive family. I know even as I said that, it's so sad that sometimes when death happens, there's so much war. There's so much war. People are fight over this, people are fight over that. And then added to the grief, there is so much hate, so much anger and so much frustration and so much, just the back and forth of all of that when indeed in a time like that you need support. You need to come together. But thank God, my family really and truly came together in that time and, we just deal with what needed to be dealt with. But I'm telling you, going through that was rough. But, moving forward, even as I have patients from time to time that pass away, and even recently I lost a patient and I tell him, it made me question, if I'm really in the right profession. If I do the right thing with my life right now, because just the pain of losing, the pain of seeing someone pass away. You understand? No matter how they teach us this in nursing school, nothing really prepares us for the amount of death that we see, especially people who work in probably like an ICU and so on. And over time, we kind of build a tough exterior. And we become even cold. Some people just become cold and it's a coping mechanism. So sometimes you see some nurse and you say, boy, the nurse is cold, man. Sometimes it's not something that is deliberate. It is a coping mechanism so that you don't lose it, man. It's a coping mechanism so that the job that you do, the job that you're called to do does not burden you to the point where, you have a mental breakdown or you're going to depression or something like that. Remember, during, again, the 2020 happenings that happened, there were healthcare workers who unalived themselves because they couldn't deal with all the loss and all the grief that they experience. Is a real thing, And I just believe that as nurses, sometimes we have to be more real about our feelings. We have to find healthy outlets because, believe it or not, there are a lot of nurses that are alcoholics. There are a lot of nurses that take prescription drugs. There are a lot of nurses that, have unhealthy ways or find unhealthy means to cope with the loss that we have to deal with on a daily basis. But as I said earlier, grief looks different for everybody. You may deal with it in a different way than I would deal with it. I deal with it in one way, you deal with it in another. Some people, them bawl, water every day. Some people, there's no crying whatsoever. There's just anger and rage and, so we all go through this thing different. But at the end of the day, we are just human beings, as I said. And we have to we face it. We try to face things, as best as we can, or we should try to face things as best as we can, but life is just going to be life. But as I said earlier, God really brought me through the season. And, if you're somebody who right now is going through a season like that, whether personally or just on your job, you may have lost a patient or you keep losing patients in like close succession. I believe my outlet is my faith, a lot of praying, a lot of reading the word, encouraging scriptures and so on. And those are the things that help me. And I'm just encouraging you to try it as well. But yeah, man, grief is not an easy thing and something we don't want to face, but something sometimes we must face, so yeah. Take it easy. As I always tell you guys, take it easy. Take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, take care of your family. Because at the end of the day, we're not all here to stay, all right? So do what you need to do and keep first things first, yeah? Blessings.